Light, as we all know, is the source of all photography. In fact, light is the source of life. There could not be any photography if there was no light. I am also sitting here under a flood of lights around me, which are making my picture possible. So, now, in this program, we ought to discuss what is the role of light in photography, because light has many moods. Light affects the content of a photograph. Light can be very flat, light can be very harsh, light can be very soft, light can have its own color. Initially, when photography was black and white, it was just a matter of contrast. It was just a matter how photography made a picture look pale and bright, but now in color photography the issue is more than that. Besides being harsh and soft, a light can also have its cast and tint. We associate moods with color. So, therefore, again when a photographer decides to make a picture, the photographer also has to conceive what mood does the photograph convey, and on the basis of that the photographer chooses the kind of light under which he or she has to take the picture. At times it is much under your control, at times it is not so much under your control. A photojournalist has lesser control on light than an advertising photographer who is shooting under control environment. So, here in this episode I want to talk a little bit about both photography in natural and available light and photography in controlled light, therefore, photography in artificial light. Sun is the primary source of all photography, of all light. So, once we shoot outside, if somebody steps out with a camera, one has to take into account what kind of a light one is shooting under. We have all been taught, or when we teach photography, the first thing that I tell my students is start observing light. See, before even handling the camera, see how light is playing on surfaces, see the direction of light, see the same scene throughout the day, how the sun is traveling, and with the travel of the sun, how the texture, how the image itself is undergoing a change because of the shadows that the light is casting. The primary principle of taking a photograph is to have light falling on the subject, therefore, light being somewhere behind the camera, so that the subject is beautifully lit. And for this kind of a picture, the best time we prescribe to students or starters is either early morning or evening, when the light is angular, when the sun is still coming up. So, the light is angular and it falls directly on the building or on the person or on the landscape that one is photographing. Top light is kind of harmful. In India, we really do not shoot under light which is top, because it creates deep shadows under your eyes and nose, and the subject becomes unattractive, pale. So, for light needs to be observed while being used for photography. An important part of photography or observing light is the texture or the nature of light. Light can be harsh or light can be soft or dispersed. The biggest form of dispersal of light is a cloudy sky. Just imagine the same picture under a clear sky when the sun is coming directly on you. Naturally, the shadows will be created by the sun. So, there will be harsh, bright and dark areas, but if the same scene is photographed under a cloud cover, the light becomes soft, we lose shadows, there is no unwanted dark and bright areas. After all, the camera also has its tolerance, the camera also has to choose between bringing out detail in the bright areas or in the dark areas, but a very simple or a easy form of light is the soft light, a soft light which is created by a dispersal of light. We also call it diffuse light. In natural sources, apart from harsh light, we have diffuse light, we have also bounced light, which is also a kind of a soft light. Light bounces off surfaces and then disperses and comes in. We do not see the direct light. If you are in a small alley, in a veranda, inside a room, the light outside is getting bounced on the walls and coming in. or if you are in a street which has tall buildings on both of sides, the light is clashing on the surfaces where on the high buildings, and inside you are getting an even light. Photographers prefer this kind of light at times, or even in film photography, photographers use a kind of a tent, a kind of a satin cloth, so that the light disperses and creates. So, there is even in an external environment scope to control light, and for a photographer to choose the direction of light and to choose the kind of light which best suits his or her image. Photojournalists at times are strapped by this constraint. They have to shoot in dark areas, they have to shoot in low light conditions, which is also helped by the kind of film they use or the kind of sensor they use. And you know of high ISO rating, you use a faster ISO rating to shoot under dark light. The lens also helps you, because if you are using a fast lens, it allows you to get in more and more light. But primarily one needs to observe light, where to place one's camera to get the best effect that light causes. When we are shooting as amateurs in outdoors environment, or we are shooting portraits of people, we generally make them sit, say, next to a window, because directional light, directional diffused light is coming in from the window and it is lighting up that side. Photography, a depth in photograph is made by the play of light on the surface of the subject. One side is dark, one side is bright, the bright side is receiving more light, be it diffused directional light or be it harsh light. So, a photographer again uses his camera, uses his viewfinder to place himself with respect to the light. The subject is somewhere, the light source is grazing or falling on the subject from one side, and the photographer himself is looking at the subject, at the play of light on the subject, and deciding what to shoot and what not to shoot, and this decides the look of the picture. Talking of color photography, it is also, one cannot ignore the issue of color temperature. We say the light is cold, usually a blue kind of a light is associated with a kind of a blue cast on the picture, or an orange kind of a cast on the picture says it is warm light. We know then when the color temperature is low, then the light becomes warm, and when the color temperature is high, the light has a blue cast. These kind of things a photographer again uses to create a mood of the picture. Lots of people use that blue, the warm tone, to create a kind of a warmness in the picture that he or she takes. But I must bring to your notice here that any professional photographer, any quality photography is not possible without use of artificial light. Photographers, photojournalists use flashlight in bright sunlight also, because the dark areas have to be filled up by what is called the fill light. You must have seen in film photography, this is a very common technique. When films are shot in the open, lots of reflectors are used. Light is bounced off the sun to fill up those darker areas, which creates a very even kind of a texture on the subject that is being photographed. So, quality photography uses both artificial as well as natural light. In still photography, since it is a still photograph, it is a freezing of a moment, what one generally ends up using is a flash. You can see a flash kept here and another here. There are various kinds of flash. This is a very small pop-up flash, this is an overhead flash. A flash sends a huge volume of light, of white light, which momentarily lights up the scene, but because it is a still scene, that is enough to freeze the picture. It raises the level of light. It helps us to take photographs in dim lit or ill lit scenes or absolutely dark scenes. So, any photographer learns to use flash with the camera to take photographs of some quality. It is not just flash which are attached to the camera, but now professional photographers use flash which are placed on stands and can be taken all over the place. There too we use techniques of photography which make the light up, which change the texture of light. A flash photography Removable flashlights have many accessories that give it a soft look or a harsh look. What is called a photo flash head has a reflector. A reflector decides the direction of the light. If it is a reflector with a very large bowl, the light falls off and is directional in one direction. You can put a wide angle reflector and have a greater dispersal of light, but the light will be harsh. You may have been to a photo studio to get a passport snap taken, and you would have noticed flashlights which have an umbrella around it. Have you ever wondered why is that umbrella over there? The umbrella is used to soften the light, because a light either reflects, falls on the umbrella, on a white umbrella and bounces off you, or it comes through the white umbrella. In both situations the light is being dispersed. Had those umbrellas not been there and there would have been direct light falling onto you, you would have horrible shadows because of the direction of the light. Ultimately, the use of artificial light is also to model or to make pictures which are almost looking like they have been taken in natural situations, in natural sunlight. So, therefore, while using artificial lights, a photographer should also be well equipped and well trained to create an environment where it looks that it has been shot almost in natural light. No two shadows, not if you have two shadows by placing two, then it looks very artificial under your chin or around your nose. So, a photographer uses, again as I said, accessories like those umbrellas that I mentioned, or soft boxes. Soft boxes are these white boxes which are put onto the light. So, again when the light passes through the white satin cloth on the soft box, it becomes a soft light. Most of portraiture lighting, in the studio which you see in glossy magazines etc., are done under such conditions, either through where the subject is lit up by the help of accessories which are put on the flashlights, which are like the reflector that I mentioned, or the umbrellas that I mentioned, or the soft box that soften the light. There are other accessories which narrow the light or make it a small beam. There is something called a honeycomb which you fit onto a flashlight, and the dispersal of the light is controlled, only the light that is passing straight. So, therefore, you can focus or beam light on somebody else. Ultimately, the fun in photography, I feel, is also about shaping the light. Any available light source, as you know, if it creates a mood, it is possible because you can control the dispersal of light, you can control the texture of light. How light plays on a surface is very important to us. I am sitting in front of a table which has a kind of a rough texture. The lighting here has enhanced that rough texture. Had the photographer, the people doing here, the lighting may not use their mind, it could look very flat because of a direct kind of a light. So, the nature of light is of prime importance to us when we judge a scene, and as I said, the judged scene has to be preconceived, so that what is the look that the person will have. We have heard of something called 3-point lighting in portraiture. When we start shooting a person, we need to create, first of all, separation from the background, for which we use a very regular light called the backlight. Backlight creates a rim around your back, so that it is separated from the background. Therefore, that flat look on a two-dimensional paper or a screen goes away. It separates you because of the contrast, because of the rim that it is created. Then the photographer has to decide what has to be the ratio on your face of light. It can be a very directional one light. If that is so, then the other side of the face will be completely dark, giving a very unnatural kind of a look. This light, which is the prime light which lights up your face and is usually faced towards that side of a face which is facing the camera, is called the key light. A photographer decides where to place the key light, deciding the look of the person who is looking into the camera. But if there is a lot of contrast between the right and the left side of the face, one needs to use what is called a fill light from the other side, which is a weaker light, but it lights up maybe it has a 1:2 or it is a 1:4 ratio of light on both sides of the face. You get details on both the sides. Yes, one side is much brighter than the other. Here I must mention the use of reflectors. You may use just a white sheet of cloth or a thermocol paper or thermocol sheet to bounce the key light back onto the face. If you do these things, they are very visible and it works very well in photography, where you use a white paper to bounce light from the key source, therefore filling in the face, and therefore it is called the fill light. In another situation, you may use a black cloth to heighten the contrast, so that the light which is falling on the black cloth gets absorbed and does not allow any light to fall on your face. So, key, fill and backlight, these are the three prime lights which one should know how to light up in a portrait. The heights of the light, the level of their dispersal, these are all things under your control, and now with the advent of digital photography, there is less scope of error because you can immediately check your results. I must mention a background light though, when you can also throw some light on the background to create this. Backlight and background light are different, because backlight is falling on the subject, where the background light is falling on the background. Ultimately, it is also about deciding the contrast or maybe heightening the texture of the background, and that does not limit us to using two or three lights only. The sky is the limit, and it is great fun using the kind of light, the kind of the flexibility which artificial lights provide us when we do photography in artificial light. An interesting use of the flash is a creative use of the flash. Photographers use, as I mentioned earlier, flashlight even in bright light, because the flash acts or does the same role of what I mentioned as fill light. It fills up. You might be shooting in a situation where the subject is against the sun or the sun is behind the subject. Therefore, when you look through your meter, you might, if you take the picture without a flash, the person may come as a silhouette or as a dark body, because the background is bright. But if you properly mix the flashlight or throw the flash, also the background is lit because of in bright light, and the fill light or the light from the flash helps you fill the foreground. So, therefore, a flash is useful. A creative use of flash is also to use to brighten the subject in situations of sunlight, because of the dark areas created by sunlight, they are filled in by the flash. The flash itself is not a very exciting, a direct flash is not a very exciting source of light in dark situations, because it is really huge volumes of light onto the subject, which flattens the surface. Therefore, an overhead flash has an interesting flexibility of bouncing the light. You can move the overhead flash up and down, and by moving it up, one can send the flashlight not onto the subject directly, but bounce it off the white ceiling, thus creating again a very smooth soft light, because had you used a flashlight directly onto your face, again it would create unpleasant highlights and lowlights on the face, whereas when you bounce it off the ceiling, you are in the process evening the light out. It strikes the ceiling and then this has a very smooth dispersal, creating a very nice and smooth light and filling up the area evenly. It is a very safe method of doing photography. It is a very even method of doing photography with the help of the flash. So, flash is a useful thing, and especially it is a very important accessory of a part of a photojournalist, because mind you, when you use a flash also, you are, as I mentioned earlier, throwing huge volumes of light, and in a flash it also helps you freeze motion, whereas the same picture you can take without a flash, but then you will have to compensate by using a slower shutter speed. You may be, though one very important thing one has to keep in mind when using an SLR camera is the issue of synchronization speed. Every camera has a shutter speed till which the flash is synchronized, and that is highlighted on every camera. Usually it is around 250th of a second or 1 to 125th of a second, which means that a flash, because of the kind of a shutter the camera has, cannot photograph beyond that shutter speed. So, a photographer has to take into account and keep one's shutter speed only to that limit, only to that limit of the to the upper limit, which is the synchronization speed, and not to shoot beyond this. So, if your synchronization speed is 250, you cannot shoot at 500th of a second or 1000th of a second. You have to limit your use of the flash till 250th of a second. These are issues which as photographers one is very careful about and uses well in outdoor photography. So, light has to be managed well. The direction of light, the texture of light, you have many sources to do that. Earlier which I said, the makeup of light, so that the directionality and its dispersal is well under our control. Therefore, we get pictures which really satisfy us, which please us. Now, again as I said, while using an important technical point, while using external lights, while using flashlights which are external, an important part of a photographer's accessory is the flash meter. A flash meter is a device which reads the flash of light. What I am holding here is a light meter, but a light meter which can read not just the continuous light which is available here, but also that flash of light. Because how do I determine what setting the camera should be at? A built-in light meter inside a regular camera only enables me to read the regular light. So, that when I half press the light meter, it is activated and allows me, because light is available. Here when the light is there and not there, because it is there only for a flash, one needs a registering device which can read that flash meter. So, a light meter is synchronized to the flashlight, and when I click it, the flashlight goes on, and once the flashlight goes on, it reads and gives me the reading on what setting of aperture I have to be to get the right picture, which is very important, because otherwise the picture will be overexposed or underexposed. So, a flash meter becomes an important accessory in the armory of any photographer who is using flashlights. Whereas, again in overhead flash, there are dials which you see behind the flash, which synchronize the output of the flash to the camera, and therefore giving the right amount of light that the camera needs for that particular scene. So, these are interesting issues which both are concerned with available light, artificial light, as well as mixture of available and artificial light. People use interesting light sources or interesting light situations to take pictures. You may have seen photographs where the sun is coming directly into the lens. It creates lens flare, and yet it creates patterns of people, etc., where you cannot make out actually the people or the subject. That is just a play of dark and shadow. Actually, that is called a silhouette. I mentioned silhouette in the beginning, but silhouette is an interesting form of using light to create an artistic photograph, because you just get an outline, because the sun is behind you, it is a bright outdoor. Therefore, the subjects which are facing the camera get darkened. Therefore, you only see their outlines and they become as silhouettes. Maybe their shadows are also on the floor which are extended, but you do not see detail. All photographs may not be about details, they may be about a kind of an impact. As I mentioned, light creates mood. Light through a picture you can feel happy, through a picture you can feel calm, through a picture you can feel sad. It is ultimately how you use light to play on the surfaces that you are photographing to enhance the mood, to enhance again the visual grammar which we have grown up seeing and understanding. So much of our cinema, so much of our television is again grounded in that. Anyway, that is why we say that cinema is a universal language, because light plays well and light works well on surfaces, and the idea or the skill of a good photographer is to use light to create the best mood that is assigned to communicate the spirit of the picture. So, as we saw just now, light has a major role in the look of the picture. It conveys the mood, it conveys the texture. Light can be harsh, light can be soft, light can be bounced, light can be directional. There are ways of doing it. One uses available light, the sunlight, the artificial light in which can have flashlights and other kinds of continuous light. So, the skill of a photographer is to acknowledge all this, learn these skills and use available and natural light in the right manner, so that the way he knows how to play it on the subject that is being photographed and get the best communication that the picture conveys in terms of its look, so that we all get a good picture to see. Thank you very much.